So, guys, I want to talk about AEW All In. And definitely, this is possibly the most important pay per view that they have so far. And the reason why I say this is that this represents, one big issue with AEW. Do they continue with the problems or do they solve their problems? And I really think that, what I would do with AEW if I was booking everything, and my thesis would be that the whole show needs to be a reset button. Like, quite honestly, the women's gauntlet match should tell everybody, okay, here are women wrestlers that are featured, and they're going to be your big stars for the next year, really. The same way with Money in the Bank, you do that. And that's also true about for the men's. Like, you need to have MJF, you need to have Mark Briscoe, you need to have Anthony Bowens, you need to have, Kyle Fletcher and Konosuke Takashita and a few other like men in that ring that that they could be bigger stars in the year. They can contend for the heavyweight championship. So there's that really. The fact that Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin don't have opponents or don't have anybody on the tag team roster that can challenge them outside of, it would make sense if he did a triple threat where it was Mystico, Hologram, and Bandito versus the Hurt Syndicate and MJF. That would make the most sense. Or you do Brody King and Templero because you have Powerhouse and Flippy Wrestler. You should really reestablish the tag team division. The next one is Mercedes and Tony Storm. That's going to be a very challenging match because if you have Mercedes win, it's going to upset a lot of people because a lot of people are going to be like, okay, now she has Mercedes 7 belts, lucky number 7. Where do you go from that? And like I've said, that the way I would do it is I would have Mercedes win, but then you have Willow cash in the casino gauntlet contract, or you have Athena do that and take the title off of Mercedes, and then you do something like Athena versus Mercedes for the Ring of Honor championship and the AEW championship, like winner takes all type of thing, or something like, and TBS championship, like winner takes all or something like that. Then the most important match of the night is Jon Moxley versus Hangman Adam Page, because this represents a lot of things with AEW. Is this going to be the match where you're going to have Moxley retain, and then you're kind of like, okay, well, what are we going to do with this? Is this going to continue on until Darby Allin comes back? Is this going to continue on until Bryan Danielson comes back? Is this going to continue on until Eddie Kingston comes back? Why are we continuing the Death Rider storyline when a viewership dropped, around 30%? And then also, they're starting to get momentum. And the big turning point was when Samoa Joe and the Yops took the trios titles off of them. So are we going to continue this cycle of saying, well, giving more power to Moxley, having him retain, since that's been hurting ratings, and giving him a continuation, is that a good idea, really, when that's kind of hurt a lot? And then are you going to do the Bobby Roode and Kurt Angle thing? Because remember what at Bound for Glory, people did not like Kurt Angle retaining the title. He retained. People thought that was a very bad decision. So the night afterwards, they gave it to James Storm, and then the week afterwards, they gave it to Bobby Roode, really. So you could run into that situation where you don't give it to Hangman, and then you say, okay, well, maybe the Dynamite, we're going to give it to Hangman, or we're going to, give it to Will Ospreay for Forbidden Door, and that's going to feel a little, like, jarring and stuff like that, So, It is a show where they need to do a lot of hard resets. And I think that a lot of issues with AEW, this is ultimately like the final chance, really, because it's almost like, what other big shows do you have during this year? And the other big show that you have is World's End, because World's End to people is a bit of a restart. What's ending with AEW? What's going to be set up for next year? So do you really want to say, should Moxley retain? Should a lot of these problems continue on for another 5 months, really? And how's that going to help your viewership? I really think that this needs to be a night of a new direction for AEW. It also needs to be a night where you push new stars, and I want to talk about that a little bit. That the first thing that I want to say is that, when you do the Casino Gauntlet with the women, Athena, Thunder Rosa, Will Nightingale, Marina Shafir, Chris Statlander, Billy Starks, and, maybe you have Red Velvet in it as well, really. Like, you have a bunch of women that have been doing good for the company, Megan Bain and Penelope Ford, Tekla. You have a bunch of women in there, and like I've said, that every woman in that match should be feuding over the TBS title and the AEW Women's Championship over the next year, just to be like, hey, you know what? You don't need to go to WWE to become a big star in the women's division. You can do it here. For the men's championship, for the men's AEW World Championship, people that should be contending are Anthony Bowens, because you know what? He's done a lot for the company. He's a good wrestler. Gay pride is something that, is controversial nowadays. So, make statements with him. You have, I would even throw in Jay Lethal, one more guy who wants a shot at glory before he retires. You can even put Dustin in that. You can put, but more seriously, Mark Briscoe 100% should be in that, because, he should be fighting over the AEW Championship. He's a good storyteller. He has a good heart. There's a lot of charisma around him. He could be a modern day Mick Foley. You should have Brody King in that, because he's done a lot for the company. He looks like legitimate badass. You put Joe, you put Hobbs in there as well, really. Kyle Fletcher, Josh Alexander, a few members of the Don Callis family, Konosuke Takashita. So that way, people know, who's going to be contending over the championship, over the next year. For the AEW Tag Team Division, I know I talked about Templaro and Brody King. I think that's your best option right now, unless you do a triple threat with Mystico, Bandito, and Hologram. And the reason why I would do that is because you can set Mystico versus MJF Part 2 at Forbidden Door, or you can even have, you can have that Forbidden Door, then you can have Bandito versus MJF for the ROH Championship at Death Before Dishonor, and that would be a main event. That would be an attraction, really. So it's ultimately and then MJF can try to be, a double champion. He can try to be the ROH champion and the men's AEW champion at the same time, really. So I think that could be a really interesting, that could be a really, really interesting, approach, really. And then, with the TNT Championship, Kyle Fletcher and Adam Cole. People can be like, hey, we're going to give it to Adam Cole, or Adam Cole's not going to defend it. Adam Cole's really not done anything with it. With Kyle Fletcher, I think it's really his time to shine, really. I know I've said that he takes things that he has an issue with comedy, but I think it's time for the crown new star to be like, hey, what's our future look like? Kyle Fletcher, he's been a Ring of Honor TV champion, I believe. He's done a lot of things in Ring of Honor. He's been with Don Callis family. He's had feuds and matches that could be main events of pay-per-views with Will Ospreay. So are you going to say we're going to keep it on Adam Cole because we like Adam Cole, really, or we're going to give it to an up-and-comer, really? When you have the show, you have to think about who's going to come back. Are you going to have Keith Lee? What can Keith Lee do? And that applies to Eddie Kingston, or if you want to debut any new professional wrestlers, really. And then, for the main event, you really have to think about what you want to do. Do you want the Death Riders, fuck that up? Do you want Chris Statlander fuck that up? Do you want to do something where Darby Allin comes in and then you're almost like, we're going to take the shine off of Hangman and Darby's going to share it? Are they going to do a match where it's like maybe a cage match or a last man standing match, or Moxley says something like, hey, you know what? Two people walk in and one person walks out. I want none of my boys interfering and other things like that, So, it is the show where they have to think about really setting up, many different divisions. It is a show where they have to think about, do they want to keep things the same or do they want to pivot, which they really need to do. And ultimately, it needs to be a show that says, is Tony Khan who he was from the beginning of AEW? A person who has a new company, has a vision, listens to the fans, listens to that they want a new direction, or is this the company where he's like Vince McMahon, where he's like, you know what, I'm not going to pivot when I should pivot. I'm going to do what I want to do, really. And because I have so much money and whatever and some TV deals, I can just continue what I want to continue on with. Even though that's going to leave people a lot disgruntled, So this show really is a polar shift for AEW. It could be the best show of the year or the worst show of the year, depending on how they book this and what they want this company to represent.